Hey guys, Rob here at 3D Printscape. I just picked up a SKR Mini E3 V2, the newer one that just came out not too long ago. Well, I guess it might have been a little bit now. But it's the newer one that's available. I would not recommend getting the 1.2 version at this point. There are some issues and they made some improvements going with the V2. First, I wanted to talk about why this upgrade is worth it, some of the things that you get from actually doing the upgrade. Then I'll talk about the actual install process, what all we need. Then we'll walk through the install process, and then we'll jump over to the computer to get updated firmware. And because I've modified other things on my Ender 3, there are some tweaks I have to make to the firmware. But if you're just installing this board without the BLTouch or any other modifications, the SD card comes with a default version of the firmware. You can just pop that in and load it and go from there. So I will talk about when you can do that if you don't have the BLTouch, and then what all extra you have to do if you do have the BLTouch, which I do. Also, because I've got these dampeners on the steppers, I've got to switch the orientation as well. So I'll mention that when we're looking at the firmware as well. Alright, so before we get started, make sure you guys hit that like button and subscribe. Again, it's going to really help this channel grow. I know I mention that in every video, but it really does help. So I appreciate your support there. First, let's talk about why you'd want to do this upgrade. There are two primary drivers for it and then two more secondary, but still worth mentioning. The first one's going to be you're going from an 8 to a 32-bit board. If you're just sending your basic configs and stuff over, the 8-bit will work, but if you're trying to do some more complex things like cylinders, things like that, the 32-bit really helps there. Also, the processor itself is faster, so you're going to get quicker engagement and everything with what you're doing. I guess this would be one of the things that's more secondary. You can also get a touchscreen that plugs into this. I'm probably going to get that in the next couple weeks. I'll be doing a video on that coming up as well. I figured I would start with just using the screen I had and then putting in the SKR Mini, just walking through the process, and then replace the screen as a, I guess, the next step. Alright, so the second big improvement on this board over the stock one is going to be the drivers that it's using for your stepper motors. This board is using the TMC 2209 driver, which is really the standard at this point, but a lot of the older printers or older tech printers don't have it yet. What that's doing is it's giving you the ability to get a more accurate print. It's doing that by allowing you to do more steps in a turn. So just think of a stepper motor as just a motor. You've got one rotation, so that would just be full 360-degree turn. The standard drivers that come with your Ender 3 or Creality printers in general can do micro steps of 1/16 of a turn. 1/16 of a turn, a limitation, really leaves a lot to be desired. It can affect things like your accuracy, overall print quality, etc. So going to the TMC 2209, you've got a ratio of 1/256, which means you can get 256 individual stops on that one rotation around. So that gives you the ability to get a lot more precise on your print, which is nice. Alright, so you might ask, why does that really matter? Because it prints fine with the 1/16. It really comes down to just a better level of accuracy on your prints. It'll give it that next step up on the print quality. Is it a requirement? No. Is it a nice to have? Yeah, for sure. Alright, so the 32-bit processor and the TMC 2209 driver are the two big things that this board is bringing to the table. That also gives you the ability to run the Marlin 2.0 firmware, which is what's going to be provided on the SD card, and we're going to grab a later copy in the video so we can modify. But those are the main two things. Now, there are a couple sub things that are worth mentioning as well. So it has direct support for the BLTouch. You don't have to worry about using adapter cards or anything like that. It's got the support for their touchscreen, which, like I mentioned earlier, I'm going to get that probably in the next week or two and do a video on setting that up. There are also a lot of people in the community saying this board makes the printer run a lot quieter. I would be interested to see what it actually does. I know there are people saying that switching out the board can make more of an impact than putting in the dampeners on the stepper motors. So for people who are running the printer next to like a home office or right now trying to do homeschooling for your kids or something like that, the quieter it is, the better. So for me, that's going to be a huge plus. If you just have your printer sitting off somewhere in a corner and you don't really care, then it's not going to be a huge selling point for you, but it is worth mentioning. Next, I wanted to talk about price. So the board itself isn't badly priced. I think it was under 50 bucks. I don't want to quote an exact amount because A, I don't remember, and B, it's subject to change. I don't know when people are going to watch this video. So I'm pretty sure it was under 50 bucks though, which isn't bad. It's definitely a significant upgrade, but it's not exactly the cheapest upgrade. It's in line with probably the BLTouch and other things like that. All right, so let's go ahead and open up this box and take a look at the components, and then we'll get started on the install process. All right, so just doing a quick unboxing here. There's not much in here. You've got a card with just their QR codes for individual things and an email for support. The rubber ducky that comes with it, I'm not quite sure why. It is kind of neat though. Kids will love it. The board itself, a small USB cable here, which I'm pretty sure we won't end up needing because we're going to flash the firmware with the SD card. We've got the SD card in here, and then we've got the heat sinks for the TMC 2209 chipsets. Alright, so that's what we have on the hardware side. Alright, so now let's talk about what tools we're going to need. We're going to need the Allen wrenches to get to the board itself. So I've got my standard set that I use for every video right here. I think this is the one we're going to need. We're going to need a flathead and a Phillips screwdriver. I just got a combo set here, 2 different size flatheads. Same thing for the Phillips screwdriver on the other side. So this should meet the needs. I would make a note that I would not use a screwdriver that has a magnetic tip. The magnetic tip could potentially affect the board itself, so just try to avoid it. And then I also grabbed just a little slicer piece here so I can get in around the board itself, because if I remember correctly, when I swapped out the Z-axis stopper, everything was glued, so I have a feeling I'm going to have to cut some of the glue out, and then needle nose pliers just in case I need it. And then I've got 2 little tweezers here that I can use just in case we need it. Don't know if they're going to be needed or not, but I figure I'll have them over here just in case they are. Alright, so now let's go to get started. We're going to want to make sure that A, your printer is not plugged in, and B, we're going to want to take off the casing around the main board. If you have an Ender 3, you're going to have the screws on the top. If you have an Ender 3 Pro, you're going to have 1 screw at the top and 3 on the bottom. It is worth mentioning that this does work with the Ender 3, Ender 3 Pro, and the Ender 5 now. I'm not sure if it works with other printers, but these are the ones that are specifically called out on the GitHub account, and they have pre-compiled firmware for it. So I know for sure it'll work with those. Alright, so I'm going to go ahead and zoom in on the printer, and we're going to get started on the install process. Alright guys, before we actually get to the install process, I wanted to go through a couple things I learned throughout the video just to kind of give you more of a heads up. First, the screwdriver that I mentioned a couple minutes ago is actually too big. You're going to need a smaller flathead, and then also a really small Phillips. You might be able to get away with just a flathead, but the Phillips will help if you have one. The next one was the firmware. They have a bunch of pre-compiled versions already, and I wanted to go with one of those instead of spending the time to actually reverse engineer what they had in the settings and try to recompile it. I think that that's going to be too much for one video. So for this video, what I ended up doing towards the end was I removed the dampeners that I had on the stepper motors just to make it more of a stock build. And then I'm going to go with the firmware that they have for the BLTouch. Only caveat being, it will be slightly off, but not by much, because they're going to be going based on the offset with the standard mount for the BLTouch, where we're using the modified fan duct cover here. It's not going to make a huge difference, it just will be slightly off. Again, I think that that's the better way to go, at least for this video and for the time being. I will probably end up doing a video on how to recompile the firmware with some of those changes later on. But again, that's probably going to be a half-hour video in and of itself. Alright guys, I got the best angle I could. So what we're going to do now is we're going to, take out the SD card. And then we're going to take off the enclosure. Like I said earlier, the Ender 3 does have a screw up top. I believe it's right here, but I lost that one at some point in time, so I don't have it. So let's go ahead and flip it over. We'll get the bottom screws out and get started. All right, so when we flipped it over, I realized that I needed to change the camera angle to get a better close-up on the actual board itself, so I did that. So now we can go ahead and take off these 3 screws. All right, so we got those screws off. Make sure you set them over to the side somewhere so you don't lose them, and then we'll go ahead and take this piece off here. All right, so we got the fan attached to this plate. I'm gonna go ahead and remove it for now just so we can get into everything. Just make it easier. All right, so we got the fan off here, and I'll keep speeding up the videos when I'm actually we're taking out the screws and stuff. I figured there's no reason for you guys to see me doing that in real time. If there's anything worth mentioning afterwards, I'll point that out. But that was just 2 screws, came out no issues. All right, so next we're gonna want to start disconnecting everything in here. So first I'll go ahead and take off the connector for the BLTouch, which is this guy. You probably won't, well, you won't have this unless you have a BLTouch. So we'll go ahead and take that out first, and then we'll start taking off all these pieces. Like I mentioned, these are all going to probably be hot glued in here. So that's going to be fun. All right, so I'm going to change the camera angle a little bit and then get to work. All right, so I got the BLTouch out. So I'm just going to pop out this red pin as well, because that's for that. Typically your Z-axis stopper would be here, but we already removed that one. So I'm going to try to use the tweezers to get in here a little bit better. Alright, that came out. Be careful when you're removing these. You want to make sure that you're not damaging anything, but we do have to work around the glue. So what I'm going to do here, before we start removing the rest of it, is I'm going to go ahead and get the board out. We've got a couple screws we have to work with, and then hopefully it'll be easier to cut the glue, and then we can start putting in the other board. All right, so I got the 4 screws out, so now we can actually work with the board. Let me take a second just to point out where they were, just so you guys can see. You've got one here, 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 and then one kind of buried right there. So that's where the 4 screws are gonna be. So next, we need to just start disconnecting all of these. All right, guys, now that we got that out, let's go ahead and take some pictures before we start actually taking anything off. So I'm gonna grab my phone here. I don't know if we actually need them or not, but I just want to be able to reference back to them in their current state. So just grab a couple different angles here. And all right, now that we got those pictures, let's go ahead and talk about a couple things really quick. If you can see here, these are all glued in place like I was mentioning earlier. Same with down here, so we're gonna have to kind of fight around that and get the glue off. But before we do that, I wanna go ahead and take off these main connectors down here. I don't like how they're on the board and the tension there. And I also wanted to make a note that I needed to get 2 different screwdrivers. The one I showed you originally is actually too large. Actually, I grabbed 3. This is going to be about the smallest one we can use, the biggest one we can use on the flathead side, and then I grabbed a little Phillips as well, just in case we need them. The one I had, it just won't fit on there, so we're going to have to I had to go on a scavenger hunt to find these. All right, so let's go ahead and start taking these off. Like I mentioned, these cables right here were from the BLTouch. So if you don't have the BLTouch, this is going to be connected here, but that's easy to find. And then same, this guy would be connected here. But those are just adjustments I had to make because of the BLTouch. So let's go ahead and get these taken out. I'm also going to go ahead and snip this zip tie here. Just be careful not to cut any wires in the process. Alright, so these should just come out now. Same with these two. Now I need to just get these ones over here. Alright, again, since we are messing with power here, you want to make sure that you do not have anything connected to the power supply. Alright, so I'm going to go ahead and zoom out a little bit so we can work on this. And you can actually see what I'm doing because it keeps falling down a little bit. Alright, I think that should be good there. One thing I wanted to note, I don't like how this is actually connected on the board. It's kind of loose. And that's where the main power is going in, so that's not great. Alright, so let's go ahead and get this hot glue off over here, and then we can do the same thing on the other side. This is a little bit easier because I already worked on it before when I took the one off for the BLTouch. Alright, that side is off. Now let's get the other side. We got the same issue here with the hot glue. I really hate the hot glue, but I'm assuming they used it just to make sure these things don't come loose during shipping or anything like that, because shipping will probably bang around the printer quite a bit. Alright, with the hot glue off, we should be able to just pop these right out. And we got the board off. Alright guys, with the board out, I wanted to go ahead and show you them kind of side by side. Just point out some of the differences. The main things to point out are going to be just the extra connections over here for the added on accessories. We're going to have to put the heat sinks on here. They already have them on over here, but those are going to be for the stepper motor drivers for the TMC 2209s. And then this has an additional connection if you were trying to do some other modifications. I'm not sure you would use it for something like the Ender, but I guess it's possible. But I wanted to just show you the quick side-by-side comparison. I mean, I guess this board does look a lot better too, but that's not going to really change anything. Alright, so let's go ahead and continue on the install process. Alright guys, so I'm going to go ahead and cable things up without the BLTouch first, kind of show you how that's done, then we'll add the BLTouch in afterwards. First thing I want to do is get these main power cables in, so I'm going to go ahead and loosen all of our connectors here. and then kind of connect those. Then we'll put the board in place on the printer itself, and then we can do the rest of the connections. So just grabbing my screwdriver here, loosening these up. And if you notice, here you go. If you notice, when I'm loosening it, it's creating a gap there. So when you're tightening it, it actually raises it up versus pushing it down. So I'm just loosening all these up again really quick. It's worth mentioning that these two here work the exact opposite way that I just talked about from these main ones. Alright, so now let's go ahead and get these cables connected. Alright, I'm going to reference back to the pictures I took, but if you look in here very closely, trying to get a good angle here, it might be challenging. It's hard to read even without it being on camera, but it shows you that this one here is positive and this one is negative. So we just got to make sure that we do the same thing. All right, so go ahead and the positive is going to be red here and the negative is black. So we'll put these in and then tighten them down. And I wanted to do these ones before actually attaching it to the printer, just because I didn't know how hard it would be to kind of angle these cables around while it's in the enclosure. Alright, so I'm just tightening it in here a little bit, and then I will make sure that we don't have anything sticking out here, and then just tighten it down all the way. Alright, that looks good. Yep. Alright, next we'll go to make these connectors. Again, I'm looking at the previous wiring diagram here, or the pictures I took. Oh, I also just noticed this. It does give you the readouts on the bottom as well, so ground, hot, ground, hot. Alright, sorry guys, I realized I had these reversed. These red and black actually go here, and then these are the main power lines coming into it. That's why I double, triple check everything as I'm going. So let's just go ahead and undo these two, move it over. So these ones go in there. Alright, and then these loose red ones will go here. Just make sure that they're twisted good. These have the weird coating on them. That's how you can kind of tell them apart. Add those in. I just want to finish tightening down now. Alright, now we'll go back up and actually put the power in, and then we'll go to mount the board. Alright, so now, like I said, we got those in. I'm comfortable mounting the board now, and then we can put everything else together. Alright, while mounting the board here, first thing is we got to get the 4 screw holes aligned, and then try to kind of hold it while working with these screws, which is not fun. Alright, got the first one started. I'm going to get them all in a little bit first, and then I'll go through and tighten them all back down. Alright, they're all in, so now I'm just tightening back down. One thing I wanted to mention while I'm tightening it down is there's a 5th screw hole over here. There's no actual bracket here, at least on the Ender 3, to mount it to. It might be for the 5. So just focus on these 4 here. Alright, now that we got that tightened down, we can go through and kind of put everything in place. Alright, so our main ribbon cable here is going to be for the display. Plug that in first. Alright, then we've got the Z motor. So I go here. Wait, that was Z. No, sorry, that was X motor, not Z. Yeah. Alright, next we have the extruder, which will go over to EM. Alright, then we got the Z motor. Which will go to ZAM. ZBM is if you're adding another motor for Z. It's an option that was brought in from, or in the 2.0 version. It was not in 1.2. I'm not quite sure why you need it, but there are some, I guess, aftermarket things you can do with it. Alright, so next is Y, so we'll plug that in. Alright, and now we've got 2 fans and then our stoppers. So I'm just trying to clean these cables up a little bit here. Alright, so I'm going to go ahead and put this fan in here. This is going to be fan 0. It's got the yellow and blue. So we'll go into fan 0 right there. Alright, next we've got our Y stopper. Which will be 2 more down. It's all labeled on the board here. Now it's difficult to see in the video, but if you're actually looking at the board, you'll see it. Our X stop. Z stop here. Alright, so the white one here is extruder temperature, which should go to TH0. And then this black one here will go to THB. Alright, so I was just verifying cabling really quick. The double black one here is for the thermistor for the build plate. The double white one here is the thermistor on the hot end. So those look good. If you don't have the BLTouch, that's everything you got to do. It's not too bad, it's just a little bit annoying kind of working in a close area like that. But now I'm going to spend a couple minutes going over what we need to do for the BLTouch. Alright, so now the fun part, guys. We need to switch out the pin out here. It should be yellow, red, blue for this. So I just need to grab this kind of. You can do that by pushing in on these metal pins here. And that will force the cable to just pop out. It's actually really hard to work with these pins in here, so I'm going to try to use these. There we go. Alright, so I'm pushing on the metal pin here and I'm pulling up on the black tab. Just be careful not to break that black tab. And then when you put it back in, just push back down on the black tab. Alright, so now we've got yellow, red, blue. Alright guys, I had to come back to this because I actually had it wrong the first time. Sorry about that. So it's going to be correct in the video, but that's why you see some things connected here that weren't connected a second ago, and you won't see it in another couple seconds. But like I mentioned before, we had to change the pinouts for the BLTouch. It should be yellow, red, blue, or yellow, red, brown if you're using a different version. And then you've got the 5 pins here. Starting from the top, it should be blank, blank, then yellow, red, blue, or brown. Alright, so now that that's correct, I'm going to go ahead and move on with the video. Next, this might have been easier to do before we put these in, but we got to go back in and put the heat sinks on these 4 chips. So let's go ahead and do that really quick. It's important that you do not skip this step, unless you could potentially fry out those chips and then have to replace the board. Alright, so these little blue guys here are the heat sinks. With the version 1.2, you have to be really careful not to touch things around it. Version 2, they kind of give you a little bit more space. So we got to pull off the blue little protector piece on the bottom to expose the sticky part, and then we will just put this on the chip and then push on it just to make sure it's sticking good. Alright, then rinse and repeat for the other 3 and we'll be good to go. Alright, now that those 4 are in there, next thing is going to be kind of cleaning this up a little bit, connecting our other fan, and then putting the enclosure back on the bottom. Alright, the fan is going to plug in right above the other fan, so you'll see fan 1. It'll just connect right there. And then we'll kind of push these cables back in. If you have some zip ties, you can clean it up if you want, and kind of just tie it together. Just kind of double checking everything here. Now we're going to go ahead and put our fan here back on the case. So it can only actually go on one way, so you can't actually reverse it or mess it up. This side has the grooves that the metal prongs to go into. And then we'll just put those 2 screws back in, if I didn't lose them. Alright, so I'm going to grab the screws that were hiding right in plain sight in front of my face, and we're going to connect this back in here. Alright, that's in. So now we'll go ahead and put this in place and then put our screws in. Oops. Alright, now that those are in place, we can go ahead and turn it over. Alright guys, now that we got it put back together, we go ahead and power it on. If you're using the firmware that came with the printer, which it will have Marlin 2.0 already on it, you just pretty much power it on and you're good to go. I would recommend updating it at least to the latest of that version. It's not difficult. It's going to be dragging a file over to the SD card, then putting the SD card in and letting it boot itself. It's not hard. Same with the BLTouch. If you're doing that with the default settings, it's going to be the exact same process with the addition of just taking BLTouch out of the name so that the board knows to pull that file down. Alright, so just to kind of show you what it looks like now, should just power on, fingers crossed. BLTouch is good, Marlin's booting up. And it looks like we're good. Everything is here. Attach media, motion, configuration. Yep, everything looks good. Minus this actual interface not being great, which is why I want to get the touchscreen one. Alright, so the next step is going to be jumping over to the computer and modifying that config, then sending it to the printer. Again, that's an easy process, but we still need to do it. So we'll go ahead and jump over there and do that now, and then we'll kick off a print and make sure it starts. Alright guys, now we're here at the computer. I have GitHub open in the right location for the SKR Mini E3 version 2. So what we will end up doing here is I'll link to these in the description below. So you can just go straight here, and then I also have the SD card that they provided. As you can see here, they have a test file and a .bin. So depending on what you're looking for, they've got a handful of pre-compiled versions of the firmware over here. So you've got basically the firmware.bin is what you'd be looking for if you're not using the BLTouch. BLTouch.bin is what you'd be looking for if you cabled it this way and you still have your Z-stop connected. We did not go that route, so what we'd be looking for how I recommended to cable it would be for the BLTouch for Z-homing. So we'll end up just downloading this, and then if you're using an Ender 5 instead of a 3, there's the two different versions here. So we just want to download this file. So click on that and then just go over to download here. And you can see that put the file down here. I'm just going to drag this over here. I'm going to rename this old one just so I have it. So just call it old. You really don't need it, but it is what it is. And if you look back at the instructions on the main page here, you'll see it says rename the file to firmware.bin. So we'll just rename this. We'll take out that, and that's everything we need. Now what we'll do is we would take this over to the printer, just pop it in the SD slot, restart the printer, and it will load this on startup. It'll take like 15 seconds. It'll boot over to it, and then you'll be good to go. That's going to be everything you need if you're running it stock. Alright, so if you wanted to do a custom version of Marlin and you want to actually compile it yourself, I'll be doing another video on that coming up. What I'm going to do this time around is I'm just going to swap out or remove the dampeners I have on the steppers. I want to see if it actually makes a difference without those anyways. So that way I won't actually have to modify it. Everything else should be fine. offset on the actual BLTouch will be slightly off, but it should be fine. Worst case, I'll lose a little bit of build area, but I'm okay with that, at least for the time being. So as long as you guys are, you should be good with what we're about to do. If not, again, I'm going to be doing a video on how to compile all of that coming up pretty soon, but there are a lot of settings that I just want to go through and verify before trying to do a video on it. I'm basically, I don't know what all they have already configured in these .bin files, so I want to try to dig through that and then basically have that as a starting point and then tweak a couple settings. All right, so let's go ahead and eject this, then we'll jump back over to the printer and update the firmware. So just eject. All right, guys, now that we got our firmware that we're going to use on the SD card, let's go ahead and load it. So we're just going to enter that, and then all we got to do is power on the printer, and it should pull the firmware off of that card. You'll see it'll go to a blue screen for probably 15 to 20 seconds and then load back into the Marlin firmware. Yep, there we go. Alright, so now I'm going to go ahead and take this card out, and I'm going to put one that actually has an object on it to print in. And first I want to do an auto home, make sure everything works out there. Alright, so that was good. Now I'm going to go ahead and kick off a print and then wrap up the video. Alright guys, the printer is running now. I wanted to make a couple of notes. First one being, make sure you set the Z offset for your BLTouch. That has to be done unless you're going to have spacing issues. And the second one being, overall, I'm not happy with the default firmware that they provide with the BLTouch. So I'm going to really try to focus on getting a guide together over the next week for next week's video to kind of go over modifying those changes. It worked-ish, but I think my offset's way different than the offset from the standard mounting brackets, and it was causing some issues. So I want to make sure to actually be able to go in there and make those changes. So if you have the BLTouch with a modified fan duct cover, wait until I do the video on actually compiling your own firmware before trying to do that, unless you're going to have to play around with some other settings. I don't recommend playing around with the settings, so just wait for that video if you can, or just put the stock fan cover back on for a little bit of time if you want as well. But overall, I mean, it's running significantly quieter. This made a bigger difference than the dampeners by far. I actually took the dampeners off and we're still getting very quiet. The only thing I actually hear is the fan. That's it. Outside of that, it's pretty much dead silent. So if you're going to be upgrading the board, I don't even think you need to upgrade the dampeners. I don't know how much it'll buy you. I think it's because it's able to do the smaller steps, the 1/256 versus 1/16 that I mentioned earlier. I think that has a lot to do with it being quiet. The fan for the power supply just kicked on, so that's probably the loudest thing, is that fan. So eventually I might look at replacing that power supply, getting one that's quieter. We'll see. If you guys are interested in that, though, let me know. I'll definitely try to make that a priority then. Alright, so that's the process. I know there's kind of a lot to it, but at the end, you're going to be happy. The results are great. The board's a lot quieter. It's going to be much more stable, and then it's going to be much more accurate. So overall, for the price, I was pleased with this upgrade, and I think you will be too. If you have any questions, make sure to leave a comment below. I'll get back to you as soon as I can. Thanks.